Hey Les, thanks for doing this.
How's it going, Gary?
Good. Hey, so can you take us through kind of the Matthew Stafford situation and how it feels to have him back and what that means going forward for the future?
It was very impactful result for sure. As we went through the process, at the end of the day, I always have called it a renewal of vows. And during the whole process, what made it impactful is uh, these partnerships between quarterback and NFL franchise. It even has a nickname, right? Franchise QB. But at the end of the day, definitely a lot of parameters that are involved, and there's trade-offs. And over the years, as you go through them, there's some wear and tear. But through the process, the neat thing is, once we sat down, it was very obvious that we all wanted to continue the partnership and continue chasing some form of greatness together. And that's exactly the conclusion that we got to, and we're jacked that it got to that point.
Um, what went into the decision to explore trading Cooper Kupp and actually having him announce on social media that you guys were going to trade him?
Well, we sat down with Cooper and said this was definitely something we were going to look into based on over the course of the year, especially there at the trade deadline where people were knocking on the door, see if we were willing to trade him. And just moving forward, we felt like this could be, uh, let's call it a time for the next chapter for both parties. Even though obviously all the chapters up until now have been definitely very fruitful, impactful. And all you can think of is this, Super Bowl MVP, and we wouldn't be champions without Cooper on that field that night.
Sean has said that, or he said the other day, that discussion about a restructure had not happened. Is that the case? Is there any way, if that contract was somehow redone, that Cooper could be back
Right
with the
now, I
Yankees?
think we're at I mean, right now we're still working through that process. Obviously, Cooper's still around. I mean, I know you can't do official trade papers until the trade deadline, but like Jonah Jackson's case, you can agree to things. So he's still around right now. We're working through it, and we'll continue to do that. But that is the less probable route that we'll go.
So is there a scenario though where he would be back with the Rams next season?
I mean, there's a scenario, but when you get into probabilities, I mean, that would be the least likely. So I don't want to tell you no today and then next week he's a Ram. You see what I mean? But you see what we're trying to do. We're working to try to uh, find a partner and a next chapter for Cooper and ourselves.
And then finally, from me, is Jimmy Garoppolo kind of the number one choice to be his backup if you can work out a deal with him?
That's been the case since we left. I know we've got to sit down with Jimmy as he figures out what's next, again with the quarterback, whether he wants to come back in a more uh, traditional backup, not necessarily competing for starting job role, or is there maybe an opportunity out there somewhere in the league where he could compete or go in as a bridge guy? I think Jimmy's sitting there. Yeah, I think he's taking the time to figure out what he might want, uh, and what's best for him and moving forward.
Thanks very much.
Stu?
Hey Les, what was your reaction to James Gladstone getting the Jaguars general manager job?
Sweet bitter, uh, definitely sweet because James, his wife Julie, his family as a whole means a lot to me. We've changed each other lives together, so it's always cool when someone like him, someone close to you, gets the op that he did, and obviously bitter because you just can't replace James Gladstone. Obviously, he had responsibilities, and we have to replace those responsibilities. Uh, Similar to what we said with Aaron Donald last year, and I'm not saying James is Aaron Donald, right? Aaron Donald's a Hall of Famer, but can't replace the person. You definitely got to replace the responsibilities. That's what we'll try to do. But really, 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 Jack for James.
And then just as a quick follow-up to that, you mentioned all those responsibilities that fell under his purview. Is that something that's going to be a collective effort, or are you close to finding a replacement for him? Where are you guys at in that
We will not try
process?
to replace James with one person. It'll definitely be collective. We're always talking about succession and how that goes, but usually when you have someone that's special, try not to just put someone in that chair and try to replicate special. That usually sets people up to fail. But we have some really, let's call it bright people that are still in the building. Looking forward to working with them and going. It's interesting too for James to go from where he did. One of my mentors that I'm fortunate to have, Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great. One of his mantras is just get the right on the bus and then figure out what seat to put them in. And James Gladstone's the epitome of that statement. When we decided to bring James on, didn't necessarily have a seat, didn't know what seat it was going to be, and then brought him on, and then eventually he's probably driving the bus.
Appreciate it.
Adam.
Hey Les, just to circle back to Cooper for a second, he has a roster bonus due next week. Do you expect to have some kind of resolution on his situation by that date?
The roster bonus is definitely if there is a deadline in this situation, that roster date does weigh a good bit in the algorithm of the formula that we're working through.
And after you came to terms with Matthew, a couple hours later, you come to terms with Alaric. As you're going through that situation with Matthew, how much are you preparing parallel paths for either outcome, and how different were those potential scenarios for this roster?
Let's just take the case of Alaric. I think that one, hey, we wanted him back as our left tackle, so that one definitely might have stayed the same. But it would be if we were to have moved on from Matthew, that would have definitely taken us down a 180 of a path per se, for sure.
What made getting a deal done with Alaric prior to free agency a priority for you?
I think that because at the end of the day, I think it was this. We wanted him back. He wanted to be a Ram, so it became a win-win situation. But we were fully prepared for maybe to get into the window for him to look around to see what might be. I mean, a lot of times I don't consider that, let's call it a player reps looking to go somewhere else, but it is probably that opportunity to gather let's call it as close to what might be market value or what other people are willing to pay as you can get to, during the phases. Right now, you can gather information, make educated guesses. You get to the window, you can probably even get write a deal presented to you. So at the end of the day, though, it was really, really, let's call it fulfilling on both sides to know, hey, we were part of bringing him in as a college free agent, and then right, he exceeded those expectations, became a starter. So at the end of the day, we both wanted to work together and continue that partnership as well.
The last time we all spoke with you, there was a lot of uncertainty at tackle with Alaric being a pending free agent and Rob deciding on his future. With them both back in the fold for next year, how much flexibility does that certainty at tackle now give you as you prepare for free agency in the draft?
But that it definitely gives you flexibility when you have a void at a position that's not everyone on the planet can do, not as easily replaced, and not many available, whether draft, free agency. It's definitely a void that screams at you, barks at you. You know it's there. So let's just take it to the draft. You could go to the draft, and now instead of adding to what we finished with last year, it's almost like you might have to use, right, a really good draft pick just to hopefully get back to even from last year. So it allows us to now, like I said, have flexibility to maybe at least on paper subjectively go add instead of just replace.
Thank you.
Jordan.
Hey Les.
Hey, Jordan.
wondering, obviously, it won't officialize until the start of the league year, but wondering how the Jonah Jackson situation unfolded and kind of reverse engineering start to finish that process from signing him last year, what you guys maybe learned from that situation or took from the situation overall.
I think I'd summarize it. We had too many good guards on the roster. All of them wanted to play, so we felt it was in the best interest of all parties to move on. I think that at the end of the day, it's a lesson in decision making, and that I always like to say, time tells tells the tale. But we've talked about it, Jordan. I think you may have interviewed me. You might have written something on it. There was an element of a conundrum there. We attempted to move Steve Avila to center. Wasn't like it was a wild guess. He played center in college. It's different playing center in the NFL. It's different playing center for Sean McVay. But when we did move Steve to center, it's one thing going through OTAs. Once we got to the stressful portion of let's call it the training of Steve to center, and that'd be training camp. Both Jonah and Steve injured. So once we got to the season, and that's even more stressful than training camp, we attempted it maybe once in a Miami game, things like that. It just became very clear. You know what? We've run out of time with this experiment, and at that point, we had dug ourselves a hole in that regular season, so we didn't have margin for training new centers. We went with the lineup we had. And we got to the end of the season and felt like this was the best thing moving forward. But as I said, that's the time always tells the tale, and. We discussed keeping Jonah, but it would probably have taken you'd probably need to play all three at guard and some rotation to keep everyone happy.
Mhm. Sean has mentioned a few times since Friday that this will be a year-to-year situation with Matthew, and obviously, as long as he wants to keep playing, you guys would love to have him at that high level of play. Kind of wondering how you will approach looking at this situation in the now, and then looking at adding a long-term potential incoming quarterback for whenever Matthew does decide that he's done. How you guys will approach that this year and beyond.
Yeah, I think we probably would approach it ASAP. I do think the part of the equation that's the hardest of that equation is it's one thing to identify a QB, it's another to actually be able to acquire him. But let's say we did, and that person could learn under Matthew, that's probably only beneficial. I just think it's, two things about that equation. Even if we identified someone, sometimes it's hard to acquire them. And then you get into, okay, wait a minute, we do have Matthew. And again, we want to chase special, whatever special may be. So maybe it's best in that moment to draft another position player and keep going that way. So you're always balancing those two things. But finding the next QB, that one, it's easier said than done. I think we've seen that over the course of history. Green Bay Packers may be doing a nice job.
Obviously some decisions on some of your own guys coming up, as well as free agency. On the defensive line specifically, I know, Bobby, Laurel, a couple guys you'll have decisions to make on, but I wonder if I guess, emergence of that group as a whole last year would prevent or preclude you guys from adding more of a high profile veteran in free agency or via trade.
I think what we've done since we talked last, prioritizing the rejuvenation, but get back in and go, okay, what are ways with additions, let's call it to people, or in other ways, hey, can we continue trying to make the bet of giving us the Rams an edge going into next year and for years after that. Again, we mentioned in the Jonah Jackson situation, right? You can do things on paper, on blueprint, and it doesn't work. But right now, that's the goal right now. Let's continue trying to do things this offseason to give us an edge, not only next year, but in years to come.
And then forgive me, quick follow-up. With Okello being a starter for you guys last year, especially through the back stretch of the season, alongside Darius, is he somebody who you will keep an open conversation with throughout?
Definitely.
Thanks.
Wyatt.
Hey Les, could you describe the responsibilities of like the scouting department as you guys are preparing for the draft and how they kind of communicate with you, and if that's kind of a collective conversation or if it's more one-on-one?
I would say this, the best mode, most efficient, probably more impactful mode of communication is the way we input our evaluations, our assessments, analyses, what have you, into the system. And at that point, I can read what everyone is trying to articulate and really compare to where there is organic dissent, where there's organic agreement, and that's probably the best way. But yes, sometimes there's large group meetings, sometimes there's more intimate meetings, sometimes there's one-on-one phone calls, sometimes there's just the old natural how we communicate. Someone maybe at a pro day gets really jacked about something or disturbed about something, and it's a simple text. But at the end of the day, I do think the way we structure and how everyone's let's call it voice is not necessarily heard, but read, analyzed, and assessed is probably the best way we communicate.
And I know you said that obviously you can't replace James Gladstone, but what are some of the responsibilities that maybe other people are going to have to, pick up with, without him around?
And that's a they're definitely a long list. Hey, Jordan, maybe you get back on and help out. You kind of spent some time going through our system, but it'd take a long time to name them now. Uh, at the end of the day, but as the director of scouting strategy, I mean, he definitely was someone who, let's call it, connected that collective together. He was definitely someone who articulated the vision that we had to them and what we were trying to accomplish in the missions of each phase.
Thank you.
Greg.
Hey Les, how you doing?
How's it going, Greg?
Not bad, not bad. Hey, I wanted to ask you, you had to renew those vows with Matthew the past two off seasons. Before that, you had some uncertainty, at least outside the building, whether your head coach still wanted to be a coach or whether AD wanted to play again. It seems stressful to be you and all that
Such is
existential.
life, Greg, right?
Well, there you go. You answered the question. I was going to say, it just seems stressful when all that existential stuff is going on with like the foundational pieces of what you're building as a GM. What's your mental approach? Is it just such is life?
Yeah, probably, and time will tell. But it's interesting. It's what we always say that last year doesn't equal this year. A lot of times I always go, and I think y'all have heard me say it in this, and I talk with my kids a lot about it because they're into this Madden football, and it's like, oh, you just take last year and as we mentioned earlier in the talking about the signing of Alaric Wright, and you just add or you just replace. At the end of the day, each team, right, based on, I call it the dark matter that you just mentioned, is very different, right? And it can show up psychologically, mentally, and even it can show up physically if someone's hey, maybe they had one, two, or three many more reps than they should have last year, and they haven't recovered as much, and it shows up in something and it drags on. But each year is different. I call it the dark matter of sports teams. It's not Madden. There's a as we say there's definitely uh, a team, and the whole key is trying to engineer team competence. The team's made up of individuals, but some individuals are going through, right, really tough things personally, and that might be during the course of a month during the season that no one really knows. But hey, they're not as we all are. We don't always come to work and make an A that day. But okay, is a C plus all you can give that day? That's all. I mean, that's just, as I said, such is life. But you just hit the nail on the head. But it's definitely something that we like to somewhat identify and intentionally try to uh, I don't know if the word is solve, but intentionally try to work through all those variables so that when we do get to camp, there's the least amount of distractions as possible, and this team can then go and attempt to reach its potential, whatever potential it might be.
Makes sense. The other thing with Cooper almost certainly leaving, you've had a really good dynamic in that room with Cooper and Puka, the veteran and the young prospect. Do you think Puka is ready to be not only a number one receiver in production, but in terms of the leadership and tone setting in the receiver room that he's going to have to do? And then also when you look to add to that room that this month, as everybody assumes you will, how important will veteran leadership be in your shopping?
I think what on the Puka question, from a standpoint of skill set production, I think it's fair for us to ask him continue to evolve being a go-to guy, being a part of a group of the collective, and not necessarily right. We're not asking him to score every point tonight, but there's going to be times where he's going to need a rebound. There's going to be times where he needs to, let's call it play defense. End of the day, each human's coded differently on what type of leader they can be, how well of a leader they can be. And sometimes in sports, it might be best to just ask that player, if we're going to use or continue the basketball analogy, is, hey, continue just right being the scoring machine that you are and being right, let's call it the defensive player that you are, and we'll find someone else to come lead. I'm not saying that's the case with Puka. What I'm saying is sometimes it's not beneficial to say, oh, we're losing someone like Cooper, you take on the entire load. That will probably happen naturally, grow into it. So we're probably more wise to say, you know what, Puka, and going naturally, don't necessarily have to be a one. And when I say that, that might mean there's some days where the other team's going to cloud you. And guess what? Whoever two, three, four is, you know what? We're going to have to pass the ball to you. And you know what? You're in the big leagues now. You can make the shot. So it'll evolve game to game. I think that's our approach.
Thank you.
Maria.
Hey Les, just to run down a couple more players. What's your feeling about re-signing Demarcus Robinson?
You know what? We're still working through all those situations. He does have some things, right? That he's got to work through legally off the season that could prevent some play time in the future. So that's the reality. That's what you have to work through. We appreciate what he's definitely done.
What about Tyler Higbee?
Tyler's on the roster, so we definitely plan for him to be there. I think going back to the question about Puka and leadership, Tyler's definitely someone that glues glues the offense, glues the defense, and probably even the special teams. Right, got a lot of young specialists and some guys covering kicks and trying to block. He's one of those humans that does that, and we really really appreciate that. And I know he's really jacked to say, hey, I'm a little more than that, and I'm getting healthier now, and I'd like to continue, right, making an impact on offense.
All right, thank you.
And then we'll wrap with Nick and then Jim.
Hey Les, how you doing?
I am good. How about you?
Well, doing great. Wanted to ask you, as you guys prepare for the upcoming draft, there's been a couple players, obviously, that have really had some dominant college football seasons. Have you had a chance to, or you and your staff had a chance to take a look at someone like a Terrence Ferguson, for example, out of Oregon?
Oh, come on. I mean, gotta love the Oregon Ducks. I'm not going to tell you whether I've watched Terrence or not. What number is he again?
81.
Oh, that guy. Nah, the answer would be yes. I don't want to get into, names and showing cards. If I wasn't on active duty and, right, trying to help give the Rams an edge, we could sit down and do a podcast together, and I'd be a lot more open.
Understandable. When you're going into the draft, for example, and you're looking at obviously various players that you feel that could potentially add to this roster, Off the field, what are some of the things that you're looking at from any of the players that you feel that would be a great fit inside the locker room?
I think the number one thing off the field is we like to look at players who, let's call it, their consistent uh, habits, consistent patterns of behavior show that football is a priority. That not only as getting better as an individual is a priority, but also helping the team that they were a part of win games is a priority. And we like to say, look, we like to just identify those players, right? Invite them to partner with us, and then they just show up, and then our staff, right, can amplify what they do, and there's no energy spent other than, right, trying to get better uh, at football individually and also helping the team become as competent as possible. Anything other than that is probably a distraction. Going back to the dark matter I mentioned earlier to Greg, all right, if you got to drag them into the building and beg them to try to be great, over time in a partnership, there's usually some wear and tear that compounds, and we'd rather just everyone get here and let's go try to dominate our roles.
Absolutely. Last one for me, Jordan Whittington. What was your assessment of him last season?
He would be one of those guys that fits that. We knew if we partnered with Jordan sometime in the draft that he would show up and just be himself. And at the end of the day, I bet he would at some point become a four-core contributor on special teams and definitely have the capacity to find a role as a contributor on the offensive side of the ball. So, he did nothing differently than he did at Texas, except we just gave him the opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Les. Appreciate it.
Jim.
Hey, Les, thanks for doing this, first of all.
Oh, enjoying
Mine's kind of a big picture sort of question, and you've been doing this long enough, and you kind of get the conflict between trying to put the best team you can on the field and dealing with what can be a strict salary cap. Was there a point early on that you kind of railed against it or fought it or or it was irritating or what have you, and at some point you just kind of decide, hey, this is what it is, let's make it work?
In terms of a rail against the salary cap or rail
against in terms of frustration that you can't get everything done that you want to get done.
I think that I would probably try to frame it as, if you ever get frustrated, does your frustration actually change the reality? Probably not. So, end of the day, there's a reality. I think I mentioned before, and in each case, there's definitely trade-offs to that reality. And where there's never going to be a perfect contract, there's never going to be a perfect team. I think that's what makes the NFL probably great, because there is an element of pure competitiveness every year, and that's probably why people like to watch it. So, end of the day, there's no perfect, there's no ideal. There's a lot of trade-offs, but within that, let's try to be the best we can possibly be within the reality of the system. So, I'm probably, like you said, however many years I'm into this, if I'm starting to get frustrated, I probably need to just take a walk or a run and go, you know what, this is reality. Let's make the most of it.
Now, last question. Are there times that you look over at Andrew Friedman with the Dodgers and maybe be a wee bit envious that you can't just go out and get everything you need?
I've never been envious of Andrew. I've only been impressed anytime I've gotten the chance to hear him, listen to him. Obviously, brilliant person and what they've done there, right? That's their reality. And I think they've definitely made the most of their reality, or at least they come close to making the most of it every year. So it's a different sport, different parameters, but only thoroughly impressed with how they run that operation over there.
Okay, I like.
And then what Snead is I can't say this, Jim. In the end, even though there's a lot of differences, when people are usually right on that stage, or in their case, probably in a locker room with a lot of plastic and everybody's shaking up champagne or beer or what have you, it does seem like the end result of actually being the one team to climb to the mountaintop usually ends the same, with a lot of people really, really in a state of euphoria, for not necessarily probably going, let's call it individually, 4 for 4, or striking out 3 in a game, but for everyone in that locker room chasing great and actually fulfilling that greatness.
I lied. I have one more question that just came up while you were answering that one. Do you have a chance to talk to your counterparts in other sports and, differing systems, but the same stresses?
You know what? We actually do. Probably not enough. It's interesting because there is an element of either one. It's one of us is let's call it in season, and we're kind of going through the ebbs and flows of the emotions of either winning a game that week or the night before, or losing a game, and then there's rarely that time where we're all just hanging out at the beach. And then the off seasons in these sports can be at an in-season pace. But the answer is yes. It's always really, really cool to see how other people do it, and kind of, like, as we said, the parameters and reality they're working with, and actually taking, let's call it some version. Anytime I do that, when you get a chance, there's a nugget I write down and go, you know what? Let's try to implement that with the Rams. But so I would say yes, but not enough.
Thank you very much.
All right, looks like we're all set. Thanks, Les.
Hey, thank y'all.